Every week, college football games hinge on a single word.
Touchdown. Touchdown, Texas. Touchdown, Oklahoma. Touchdown. Touchdown. Touchdown, Wisconsin. Touchdown. 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 Touchdown, Stanford. Touchdown. Touchdown, Alabama. Touchdown, Notre Dame. Touchdown. Wow.
This is Touchdown Radio. Here's Gino Torretta and Taylor Zarzour.
It is week 11 of the college football season. He is the two-time national champion, the Heisman Trophy winner, Gino Torretta. I'm Taylor Zarzour. We're getting you ready for the action this week. We have a great slate on Saturday, but we don't have to wait till then. We've already had some action this week. Let's go ahead and get it off the top here, Mr. Torretta. Congratulations to Eastern Michigan becoming bowl eligible, winning on Tuesday night in Maction. Ohio beat Miami. Toledo beat Ball State. Kent State destroyed Bowling Green. Central Michigan beat Buffalo. And Northern Illinois beat Western Michigan. And the MAC is done for week 11 because they play in the middle of the week each week. Tonight, we have a couple of games in the Fun Belt. We've got Georgia Southern trying to become bowl eligible. They're playing at the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns at the bottom of the hour. And Tulsa's playing at Memphis, also at the bottom of the hour. So those are your Thursday night games. Tomorrow night, a really good one. East Carolina's at Cincinnati. Those two teams are still in the fight to get to the American Championship game. The 8th-ranked USC Trojans play Colorado tomorrow night as well. And Fresno State tries to get bowl eligible against UNLV before we get to that Saturday slate. I think it's always important to give those shout-outs, to the teams that are trying to become bowl eligible.
Well, how about the Central Michigan comeback? I mean, they were getting smoked at halftime and then a huge comeback behind their freshman quarterback. So it's great to see, and I can officially confirm after doing the Miami Florida State game, Miami is not going to be in the college football playoff this year.
They're not? Okay. Yeah, that was a rough one. I don't know that a lot of people were paying attention to that because it was happening during the Alabama LSU game, and certainly because it became so lopsided. Just crazy to see that your alma mater loses 45-3 in that game. We'll get to that coming up a little bit later and talk about just go around the country a little bit. But I got to start with the rankings here and ask your thought on them. Georgia is number 1. Ohio State's number 2. Michigan is number 3. TCU is number 4. Undefeated TCU, number 4, ahead of one-loss Tennessee, who's number 5. Oregon is coming on like gangbusters. They're number 6. LSU with 2 losses is still in the fight. They've won a national championship with 2 losses before. Here they are at number 7 after the big win against Bama. USC is behind LSU at 8. Then there's Alabama at 9, and Clemson, after getting blown out by Notre Dame, falls to number 10. Alabama plays at number 11, Ole Miss, this week. So what do you make of at least those 11 that I've been through so far?
Well, I think the top 4 is right. I think that obviously 2 and 3, Ohio State and Michigan are going to play. So I think that'll wash itself out. I think TCU, the committee realized, hey, they have a pretty impressive schedule so far. Maybe we underranked them in week 1, but they got Texas this week, so they can either make it valid that they're in the top 4, or one of their comeback wins. They've had some close ones, and maybe we'll see how it turns out. But they're on the road. Tennessee, I thought that that's about right. Oregon, you may have a disagreement with Oregon, Tennessee, just because maybe Oregon's playing better at this time and their loss is a lot longer away, at least based on how past rankings have gone. But USC, I thought UCLA is their record and their schedule is a little bit stronger than USC's. I would probably have UCLA higher than SC, but
they're 12,
that's me.
By the way,
and they're gonna play. I thought with last weekend, I thought the ACC is completely out of it. I don't see how, there's not a lot of the strength of the conference isn't there. North Carolina, even with 1 loss, is way down at 15. So I don't see anything Clemson can do based on the rest of their schedule that would vault them back in. And I don't think North Carolina, even if they won out and beat Clemson, would be enough to vault them into playoff contention. So I thought with last week, I thought the ACC is out of it.
All right, a couple things here. First of all, I'm a big believer in looking at the entire body of work. Now, I mean, if we're breaking ties and we're splitting hairs, then I'll look at what you said, how you're playing right now. Head to head certainly would be a big factor. But the first thing I want to do is look at your entire body of work. And I almost always want to give preferential treatment to a team that has a better record than the other team. Well, as an example, TCU, like you said, is 9-0, and Tennessee is 8-1. Personally, I'd have Tennessee at number 4. Typically, I wouldn't. I'd go with the better rank or the team with the better record in this situation. But I'm just looking. I'm watching Tennessee play all year, watching TCU play all year. I'm watching TCU last week, and they're in a dogfight, Gino, with a Texas Tech team that's 4-5. Going into the final quarter, TCU is losing the football game at home to 4-4 Texas Tech. They're losing 17-13 going into the fourth quarter. The Horned Frogs deserve to be in the top 5 or 6, in my opinion. But you look at the wins they've had. Oklahoma has 4 losses. Kansas has 3. K-State has 3. Oklahoma State has 3. They don't have a win against a signature team, and part of that is because the Big 12 is sort of cannibalized itself as the season has gone along. Combining that or comparing that, I guess, to Tennessee, who, in my opinion, has had some more significant victories, certainly the Alabama victory at the top of the list. I know that they were not in that game against Georgia last Saturday, and you have to penalize them significantly for it. But when you look at what they did, blowing out LSU on the road, beating Florida, beating Pitt, beating Kentucky, and the Alabama win, I'd have Tennessee ahead of TCU. I'd also have Michigan ahead of Ohio State. But like you said, that it's splitting hairs. They're 2-3. They're going to play each other. But the way that Oregon got blown out to start the season has to matter. The way that Tennessee just lost to Georgia has to matter. But I might have Tennessee and Oregon both ahead of TCU right now. And I don't understand why they were number 7, like you said last week, and now they're number 4. They were behind Alabama last week, and now all of a sudden they're ahead of Tennessee. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Off, like you said, not exactly a dominant performance. And I think that, listen, with this week against Texas, because Texas is one of those teams like, okay, they're putting it together, they got all the weapons, and then they don't perform like we you want them to on Saturday. So the more that we have this playoff ranking thing, I try to not overreact or not even really react. I'm like,
Fair
okay,
enough.
What's the big deal? The Big Ten, we know Ohio State and Michigan are clearly better than anybody in the conference. They're going to play each other. It's going to wash itself out, and we're going to get one of those teams in the top 4. Now, if it's a game where it's 45-42 and maybe you get both of them, I think the interesting thing, like you mentioned with Tennessee, they're playing lights out. They go on the road. It doesn't, Georgia just thoroughly dominates them. The rest of their schedule isn't very good. So is there going to be anything Tennessee can do to remind the playoff committee, hey, we still are the team that started off the season 8-0 with a home victory against Bama, with beating, LSU, with beating Florida. That's going to be interesting to me. I think that the SC UCLA game, in a couple weeks is going to be interesting for the Pac-12. Oregon Washington is, listen, we can talk about venomous rivals and hated rivals. That game is on. I mean, if you want to talk about a rival in the West Coast that rivals the hatred of SEC teams, I think you need to go out and go to that game. It doesn't matter if it's in Oregon, doesn't matter if it's Washington. Man, those two schools absolutely despise each other, and I think that's going to be a huge game this weekend. So I just think that we kind of overreact. Oh my God, can you believe the season ended now? Well, it's not ending now. I just know I wouldn't feel very good if I was Tennessee having coming off that loss, and then you look at the rest of their schedule, and it's not like they have a power player left on their schedule in the SEC to impress the voters.
Let me ask you about that. So let's say I know that it's always, fun to play the speculation game, the assumption game, but let's assume Georgia wins the rest of their games. They finish the season 13-0. They're the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. No drama there. Okay, so the winner of Ohio State, Michigan, undefeated, 13-0, wins the Big Ten championship game the week after they win the game between Ohio State and Michigan. So the winner is in the college football playoff. So that leaves 2 extra spots. Undefeated TCU, no matter how much I just scrutinize them, they'll be in the college football playoff if they're 13-0. There's no question about that.
Right.
But there's 2 remaining spots. You could go with the loser of Ohio State, Michigan. You could go with
Tennessee.
Big 12 champion. You could go with Tennessee. You could go with Pac-12 champion.
Yeah, Oregon, UCLA, USC. If those.
Tell me the pecking order there. I feel like TCU would get the number 1 spot if they go undefeated with those 2 remaining spots.
Correct.
I feel like they would get the number 1 spot, and then who would get the other? Would it be loser of Ohio State, Michigan,
I think
Tennessee,
it depends.
or Pac-12 champion?
Wouldn't it depend on how the Michigan-Ohio State game goes? I mean, remember years ago with the BCS where it was like, it was a 3-point game or 2-point game, and everybody's like, why can't we just have them play again as BCS 1 or 2? I think the committee at that point, let's say Michigan, they go on the road. If they end up losing by 3 or less,
okay,
I think then the committee's going to say they went on the road and performed better than a Tennessee on the road against Georgia. And I think that Michigan would get the benefit of the doubt.
Or really in Oregon, because that game was in Atlanta, but that was a Georgia home game, basically.
I think, though, if TCU loses, then you're talking about a second SEC team in that top 4. Then it's a body of work of okay, that's a beauty contest at that point in time, and that's why I just like we can have all these machinations of what's going to happen. And the best part about college football is, okay, we'll see what happens. And then
that's going to be fascinating.
Where are the chips?
Those scenarios.
But, to me, it's like Oregon's playing great. I think UCLA's schedule so far, and they have the same record, is better than USC's. But USC seemed to, obviously, the voters are picking them a lot higher. I just, based on last week, I think it's going to be, if TCU ended up losing, then it's a second SEC team. Then it's if one of those Pac-12 teams gets out with 1 loss and they win the rest, then they're probably in. But based on all that, I still think the ACC.
They're done.
I think they're done. I
agree. They would need all sorts of chaos to happen in front of them for Clemson to get back in this. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I can't really. I mean, I would have to come up with.
What if LSU? Let's say LSU represents the West,
Georgia,
and they beat Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to put LSU in the top 4.
They'd be in the playoff.
And then Georgia will drop to 4?
You would have Georgia and LSU both in, and then Tennessee would be out of luck in that scenario most likely. But yeah, no, LSU is not out of this, no question about it. Alabama's out of it, and I have so much to ask you this week. We can't have any guests on the show because I have so much to ask you. I got to ask you about what's happened to Bama. I got to get to the Group of 5 representative, which we may this Tulane Green Wave versus UCF game may determine who gets to the New Year's Six this year. So I got to ask you about that. I got to ask you about the Heisman Trophy. We're both Heisman voters, and there's a guy playing quarterback for the Oregon Ducks. There's a guy from Myers Park High School playing for the North Carolina Tar Heels that I got to ask you about coming up in just a minute. So we got to get to that. The slate is great this week. We got a lot of really good games that I need to get into as well. So I don't know how we're going to fit it all in. So we better take a break and come back and do it. Touchdown Radio Tailgate on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84. He's Gino. I'm Taylor. We're going to get to the Heisman coming up in just a few minutes. Before we do that, everybody seems to be fascinated in college football right now with what's happened to the Crimson Tide, self-included. They're ranked 9th in the country. They're 7-2 on the season. We have seen this 15-year dynasty that Nick Saban has created in Tuscaloosa, and some would say it's the greatest dynasty we've ever seen in American sports, let alone college football. You're not going to get much argument from me. You and I have watched a lot of it over the last 15 years. Gino, I'd like to know why you think the team that almost all of us thought would be in the mix all season long in 2022 is basically eliminated from the college football playoff as we sit here in week 11.
Well, obviously the two losses, but I'm not the sky is falling. I mean, come on. Their roster is still, one of the best in the country. Their coaching staff is the best in the country, maybe the best ever. They had a on the road knuckleball go over the uprights in Tennessee for a loss. And then credit Brian Kelly at LSU, because he was like, I'm not going to sit here and give Alabama more chances to win this game at overtime. I'm going for the win myself. And it happened. And I think that, you got to credit LSU. So you got a 1-point loss and a 3-point loss. I don't see how, and they're both on the road. So it's unfortunate. If you're an Alabama fan, they're not going to be in the mix for a playoff because they're not going to represent the West in the SEC championship game. You got Georgia, who's undefeated, rolling along as a returning, defending national champion. So I'm far less about the sky is falling and Nick Saban's done, and I can't believe, because I don't follow recruiting that much, but I'm fairly certain they're probably still in the top 3 in recruiting right now for next year. They're every year they're solid. I'm not saying it's bad luck, a knuckleball on the road over a long field goal. And then, like I said, you got to credit Brian Kelly for going for the win.
That is level-headed commentary from you. No question about it. That is exactly what's happened to them. They've been in the game all 9 times. They still very much belong at the upper echelon of college football. And you're right. They've had 2 last play of the game losses so far. They've lost by a grand total of 4 points. But there are a few things that I'd like to point out, because I've noticed a difference with this team compared to almost all of Nick Saban's national championship contending teams. And our friend Greg McElroy said this earlier this week, Gino. He said that, right now, Alabama feels like it's at a little bit of a crossroads. This is the first time I have legitimate concerns. I've never, ever, not one time after a loss, after a season, felt like the best of Alabama might be behind us. This is the first time where I think it's possible. Here is, and McElroy went on to say, the offense doesn't have much of an identity right now. That would be what I would point at. So there's a few things. Their offensive identity, and you've seen it. Their offensive identity is, hey, Bryce Young, you're the greatest player in the world. Figure it out. That seems to be their offensive identity. They don't have anywhere close to the same kind of skill at wide receiver that they've had in the past. Now, granted, what they had 2 years ago may be the greatest collection of receivers we've ever seen, but they do not have that kind of talent on offense around Bryce Young that they used to. And their offensive plan seems to be, Bryce, figure it out. That's not going to work. Secondly, the one thing that Alabama, in my opinion, the reason why, more than any other reason why they have been so dominant over the last decade plus, they are the most physical team in the country in the fourth quarter. They take the air out of the ball and they bludgeon you at the line of scrimmage. They can't do that anymore, Gino. They're not as good as the opponent at the line of scrimmage, which is shocking to see. And I wonder, I openly wonder about their strength and conditioning program in the post-Scott Cochran era, who is now the special teams coach at Georgia. You watch the Georgia Bulldogs and the way they beat Tennessee last Saturday, that was Alabama football for a decade plus, what Kirby Smart and his coaching staff and his strength and conditioning program did to the Tennessee Volunteers at the end of the game. And Jalen Hyatt, the receiver for Tennessee, that's the all-world receiver, said Georgia is so much more physical than Alabama is. It's just surprising to see a Nick Saban team have these kind of warts.
And Bryce Young is, and I would say at times, and we've been doing this a long time, when you have a quarterback like that, sometimes the offensive staff gets a little lazy because they rely on that guy, whoever it is, to pull them out and pull victories out of a hat. You talk about the receivers. Najee Harris was, I believe, the best running back at a high school when he came out and was unbelievable. And we're like, boy, he never gets the ball. Oh, he goes in the pros and he's, legit. right off Jump Street. So I think that you talk about that personnel turnover. I would agree. The guys up front, I mean, there was a stretch there where the boys up front for Alabama on both sides of the ball were just dominant, and they haven't been as dominant. If you look at the game, and I saw Ed Ogeron this week down in Miami, and he goes, look at this. The top 5 scoring offenses in college football are like 45 plus points a game. He's like, the game has changed to the spread. And it's like, okay, how do you deal with that? You look at, and you broadcast SEC. So you see more base defense than I see. There's none of the teams in any other conference. They don't even have 3 linebackers. It's like 5 nickel and dime personnel, and that's it. And they're trying to just slow down offenses or disguise coverages and things like that.
There are never only 4 defensive backs on the field. Never.
Right. So I get that, but I still, we are still talking about Nick Saban, and we are still talking about Alabama. So it took him a little bit maybe to change to the spread on offense. Remember when McElroy, he wasn't running the offense he's running now. True. And now he's running a different scheme with Bryce Young. Now, defensively, they've had such, man, I just go, look at Miami in 2000, 2001, 2002. They had all that talent. Man, to keep replenishing that. And hell, it's hard as hell.
It is hard as hell, but he did do it for so long, and that's what made it fascinating. And Georgia's doing it right now. They just lost the whole world to the draft. And they will whip you in the fourth quarter. They're so much more physical. Anyway, it's interesting, and it'll be fascinating to see what changes Nick Saban makes in this offseason. Big game this weekend against Ole Miss still, as those 2 teams are 2 of the better teams in the country, number 9 versus number 11. I want to transition to the group of 5 here, because I think it's very important for us to keep concentrating on this the next couple of years. There's a strong chance that the College Football Playoff Committee, Gino, is going to put the 12-team playoff in effect 2 years from now. It for sure, it's going to start in 2026, but there's a lot of power brokers that are trying to get this in effect in 2024. So if that's the case, that means that a game like Tulane this Saturday, who hosts number 22 UCF at 3:30 on ESPN2, number 17 versus number 22. That would be a de facto play-in game almost. Now, the winner of the game still has to keep winning, obviously, to get to the college football, to get to the New Year's Six. But you look at whoever wins the American this year, you look at Coastal Carolina, who only has 1 loss in the Sun Belt. They're not completely out of the race to get to the New Year's Six. Liberty is not in a conference. I just watched them beat Arkansas. Inexplicably, they're not in the top 25 in the playoff rankings. They are number 19 in the AP and the coaches. I don't know what in the world is going on in that committee room right now. But Liberty next year will be in Conference USA. And if Hugh Freeze stays there, which is a big if, then they'll be in the mix for this too. But that's going to be really fun to follow. I think that's going, instead of just concentrating on the top 4, which we've been doing the last 7 or 8 years, now we're going to get to concentrate on all of college football, and we're going to get to concentrate on the group of 5 and who gets to make it into the playoffs. I think that's a great new wrinkle.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. It adds excitement. It adds, more opportunities for people to play in. I would probably equate this to kind of when the BCS era, where teams or the voters finally gave Boise State credit. Remember, for years, Boise State was knocking at the door. Oh, they don't belong. And then they go to the Fiesta Bowl and they beat Oklahoma. And then all of a sudden, oh, wait, maybe they are a pretty good football team. Maybe there are pretty good football teams that aren't in the Power 5. And not to say that it's every single year that we have a team that can beat, one of the blue bloods. But I don't think there's any question. I mean, Tulane's playing great, and this is a huge game for both of these teams, and it will be even bigger, as a play-in game to get in that top 12. I don't think there's any question. The bad thing, Coastal Carolina, I think their QB's out now for the rest of the year. He's dinged up, so I think that's what it comes down. That's what college football is great, and especially with this transfer portal. You're getting guys leaving major programs and going to AAC programs or what you would say is a step down than one of the Power Fives, and going there and kind of resurrecting their career and playing, balling out, and adding some intrigue to the college football season. But I like it. I just wish they would go to 12 even sooner. I would wish they would do it next year.
I mean, how about this? So the top 4 conference champions, Gino, receive buys into the quarterfinals. So that would mean Georgia, Ohio State, TCU, and Oregon, just as we sit here right now, would be those 4 teams. And then how about these first round matchups? Most likely on campus. You would have number 12 UCLA at the Big House playing number 5 Michigan. Number 11 Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin going into Neyland Stadium, him wearing a helmet because they're throwing golf balls and mustard at him, playing number 6 Tennessee. Number 10 Clemson playing at number 7 LSU with all the "this is the real Death Valley" trash talk that week. That'd be
Who
fun.
are the Tigers?
Yeah, and which Death Valley is the real Death Valley? And then, sign me up. Number 9 Alabama at number 8 USC, and Lincoln Riley in Los Angeles. Come on, man. I mean, that's gonna be really good.
I don't see the argument against it. I mean, really, it's just that's why I wish they would get it sooner than later.
I totally changed my tune on this. Like I thought, this might hurt college football, and I still do wonder, about late November and championship weekend if players are going to rest and all that. But to get that sort of prize at the end of the season would be sensational. So be excited to see that. Okay, next up, I got to ask you about the Heisman Trophy because I have no idea what I'm going to do, which is great. Like it's November, it's November. We're sitting here on November the 10th, and I got no idea a month from now who's going to win the Heisman Trophy.
That's exactly perfect. That's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah. All right, good. Well, let's talk about that coming up next on Touchdown Radio Tailgate. He won the Heisman Trophy 30 years ago. He is Gino Torretta. I am Taylor Zarzour. You do look better today than you did at many points in the last 30 years. There's shout out to Andy Spear and to all the fine folks at Peloton who have changed your health patterns in the last few years. So congratulations on that. We had a hell of a party 5 years ago for your 25-year anniversary in New York. That's the most fun I've ever seen my wife have at a party. So that it was a good time.
She was getting my head coach Dennis Erickson beers like he needed any kind of incentive.
I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like it. Dennis Erickson looked at Betsy throughout that night. Hey, Betsy, I think I want a Coors Light. And Betsy's like, wow, that's amazing because you wanted one 5 minutes ago. She took care of Coach E that night. That's for sure. All right, let's get to the Heisman situation for this year and who may be joining you into what I think is the best fraternity in sports for an individual award. Here's some names to think about. Bryce Young, who won it last year, I can't see any scenario where he's going to win it now, especially after his performance against LSU. A lot of it has to do with parts around him not being nearly as good. I would say I'm 99% sure we're going to have a new Heisman Trophy winner. And once again, your buddy, Archie Griffin, will remain as the only two-time Heisman winner. Agree?
And like I said, the bar is set so high when you win it as a young player, you're comparing your own stats to each other, and voters are just going to say, well, his stats aren't as good as last year, and move on. And the 2 losses, obviously, as a quarterback, definitely hurt in the voters' eyes.
So how about these guys? Stetson Bennett at Georgia, Jaden Daniels at LSU coming off that sensational performance against the Crimson Tide, Max Duggan at TCU, who's led the Horned Frogs to the 4th position in the country, DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA. Any of those guys you think have a chance?
I tell you what, Bennett's performance last week against Tennessee was outstanding. I mean, on the ground, throwing it. I know he gets them in the right plays. I think they might have an outside chance. The question there is when you put quarterbacks against each other, you have to then look at statistics and some of the stats of CJ Stroud, some of the stats of Hendon Hooker, it makes great play look, well, they're not that good. Look at the stats of this guy. So I think they might have an outside shot, but I would say would be an outside shot. But the great thing about this is we talk about from a team wide, Michigan, Ohio State are playing. That's going to be Corum against Stroud. And if one of them,
those two yet,
if those two light up the scoreboard, then that's going to change the race. A conference championship game. Remember last year, Bryce Young was not the favorite, and he comes out of the SEC championship game and the Auburn game as the favorite. There's so much ball left.
Yeah, and I think a similar thing's going to happen this year. I've already named 4 guys. I wanted to name 10, and I'm going to give you the next 3 that are on my list before I give you my current top 3. My next 3, in no particular order, are Hendon Hooker, Blake Corum, and Corum and Caleb Williams are my next 3. Hendon Hooker at Tennessee did not have nearly as good a game last week. 195 yards, no touchdowns, threw an interception against Georgia. He doesn't typically do that. He's only thrown 3 on the year. Caleb Williams at USC has been sensational this year. And Blake Corum, you just referenced at Michigan. If a running back's going to win the award, I would certainly think it would be him with the way he's performed this year. Any favoritism towards any of those 3?
I would probably lean Corum out of those because he's got the Ohio State game and he's got an opportunity with millions and millions of eyeballs. Caleb Williams at USC, I think now's when you're going to evaluate him. You're going to evaluate him versus the best in the conference at the end of the year. And I think that he has had a good year, a very good year offensively, but statistically, he's not even in the same ballpark as Hooker and Stroud from his pure passing numbers and that. So, but like I said, this is what it comes down to. This is all of the names, whether it's May at North Carolina, all of the names, they're there. They have played their way into the discussion. And really the best part is all of those names are going to have opportunities if North Carolina and May light up the scoreboard against a very good Clemson defense in the ACC championship game. Is that going to be enough at the end of the year to put him in enough eyeballs to say, wow, this guy is the best player? Because I think we still have an issue whether Caleb Williams, remember a few years ago where Christian McCaffrey had one of the most unbelievable seasons, and he was playing at, the games were tipping off at 11 at night.
Yeah.
And the voters were already asleep, I
stayed up. I stayed up and I voted for him, by the way. Just want to throw that out.
That's what I mean. It's like you and I, we watch this stuff. And so we see it firsthand and it's like, okay, but there's enough. What I love about this race is there's not one and everybody's just, hey, this is the deal. It's, you got a core of great players that are having great seasons. And oh, by the way, the playoff isn't even set. We don't even know who's going to be in that. Who's going to ball out in these last few games and win it.
Well, let me just tell you what my current top 3 looks like, which I promise you will not be my top 3 next week or the week after, because I'm thinking.
I will say that. Hold on, before you say that, and I'm sure people are listening, going, "Oh, it's easy to vote for the Heisman Trophy."
It's not.
If you get a ballot with 3 blank lines, it says name 1 school, name 2 school, name 3 school. You get to pick anybody. It is not easy picking out the best 3 players.
I guess I've got 10 guys I'm thinking about right now. Not 3, 10. That's going to be harder than ever to figure out who I'm going to vote for second and third. But you're right. These games will help determine that. But here's who I would have right now in my top 3. And again, it's just subject to change next week. Number 3, Charlotte, North Carolina's Drake May is number 3 on my list. This guy has had a sensational statistical year. He had another great game this past week. He has over 3,400 offensive yards, 35 touchdowns so far this season for the redshirt freshman quarterback for the North Carolina Tar Heels. Number 2 on my list. I loved covering this kid, and I am so proud of him for what he's done out at Oregon, and that is Bo Nix, who's had an outrageous statistical season. Now, look, he did a lot of this last week against Colorado, and Colorado's 1-8 and they stink. But I'm really excited to watch Nix play against Washington. That might be the game I'm most excited to watch from a Heisman standpoint this week, based on what you said so far. And then barely, number one on my list would be C.J. Stroud. Now, look, people say, Taylor, did you watch the game last week? Yeah, I watched the game. It looked miserable in windy conditions in Northwestern. I don't think anybody would have played well in those conditions. And obviously he didn't do much in that game. But Stroud's been great in big moments so far this season. And I'm still giving him the top spot on what is a terrific team. But I think he's better than Fields was. I think he's better than Barrett was. I think he's better than just about any Ohio State quarterback we've seen in recent years, and he's been great in the big moments.
And he's done it for 2 years.
Yeah. This weekend, there are a couple of games that I'm going to be watching closely. I'm watching Bo Nix play against Washington. As a Heisman voter, I have to watch that. I'm watching Stetson Bennett play at Mississippi State.
Yep.
And I'm watching Max Duggan play at Texas. Those are 3 big games. And then you're right. Next week's got plenty more. Thanksgiving week has plenty more. And then championship week will determine who's going to win the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think that, the thing is, you can evaluate players and you say, and I guarantee other voters will say, well, the ACC isn't that strong. You know what I mean? There's going to be chinks in every kid's armor, or Bo Nix. Well, they did terrible against Oregon. They'll hold that against him the entire season when, basically they traveled in a home game in the Dome against the Bulldogs to start the year. But I don't think there's any question. All of those players, and I mean, there's probably a dozen guys that here at the end that could play themselves and win a Heisman. I would go back to this point in time last year. Did anybody think Bryce Young was the favorite or going to win the Heisman Trophy in the start of November? He was in the discussion,
but not at the top.
No, and I thought C.J. Stroud was going to win it last year about this time because he threw for like 6 touchdowns against Michigan State, and I'm like, holy cow, that's a Michigan State team. Ended up 11-2, I believe, from a season ago. I'm like, he lit him up. And then it was like Bryce Young just came from behind and took
the end of the Auburn game.
It was unbelievable.
Georgia game, he was terrific. So, and then I also want to mention, I'm watching May play at Sam Hartman in Wake Forest. The over-under is only 77 in that game. That's ridiculous. It should be 110 is where the over-under should be in that.
Defense is optional in that one?
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if it's even on going to get off the bus. Coming up next, we're going to go through all these games that we'll be picking, and here he is. Torretta's caught me again. What a shocker. We'll get to the picks coming up in the next segment, go through the big games in Week 11 of the college football season on Touchdown Radio Tailgate. Gino, we got to get right to it. There's a lot of games that we're looking at this week, and I'm going to go to the ones we're not picking first. Number 21, Illinois versus Purdue. Noon kick on ESPN2. There's about 12 teams that can still win the Big Ten West. These are 2 of them. And after the Illini laid an egg last week against Iowa, that game, watch out. We could see what happens there. Wazoo could get bowl eligible if they beat Arizona State at home in the Pac-12. The winner of the Badgers at Iowa is still in the Big Ten West race, and the winner is also bowl eligible. Oklahoma is fighting for bowl eligibility. Isn't that crazy? Wow. They're 5-4 playing at West Virginia. Kansas, congratulations. They're in a bowl after beating Oklahoma State last week. They're 6-3 playing at Texas Tech. And the ACC is just nothing but a bunch of 5- and 6-win teams. Duke is already a 6-win team. Congratulations to Mike Elko on punching their ticket to the postseason. They host hapless Virginia Tech this week. Pitt's 5-4. They could get to 6 wins at Virginia. Miami at Georgia Tech. Losers out, probably. Winner still has a chance. Can't believe the Jackets are still in that position. And FSU's already punched their ticket. They're 6-3. They play at Syracuse this weekend. Outside the top 25, you have a whole lot of teams like SMU, Houston, Georgia Southern, JMU, App State, Marshall. The list goes on and on of all the Fresno State, San Diego State, and Rice that all have a chance to get to 6 wins this weekend. If you're scoring at home, stop. There's too much to keep track of there. All right, let's get to the picks. I only have a 1-game lead on you now.
Liberty, and Rock Chalk Jayhawk.
That's exactly right. You got both of those. I picked Oklahoma State and Arkansas. I'm a loser, and so now I'm only 1 game ahead of you. Let's go to the noon slate. Number 7, LSU is at Arkansas at noon on ESPN. After calling the game last week, I am picking LSU to win. KJ Jefferson's shoulder is not healthy. I'm going LSU.
Does Vegas know something, though? How's LSU only favored by 3.5? I will take LSU as well.
Really concerned about that Arkansas offensive line that I watched last week. Okay, next up, we're going to the 3:30 slate, and we're going to pick number 9, Alabama, at number 11, Ole Miss. Gino, what's going to happen here?
Wow, Bama's favored by 12. Ole Miss 8-1, still kind of in it. I think Bama rights the ship, goes on the road and wins this one.
Didn't you say that last week? I'm picking the Rebels.
No, you convinced me that they would never lose on the Bayou.
I need to see it to believe it. I need to see Alabama play good on the road.
All right.
And if they don't, then it'd be the same old story. So I'm taking the Rebels.
Bet against my man Saban. Bet against.
There you go. First time for everything. Number 17 Tulane versus number 22 UCF. 3:30 on ESPN2. This is the first time Tulane has been ranked and played a ranked opponent in any game since 1949.
Well, I'm taking the home team.
Oh, you are? Okay. Well, I'm not. I'm taking UCF and the Gus Bus on the road.
Cafe Du Monde and some beignets before.
Man, that sounds good, doesn't it? Let's go next to number 6 Oregon versus number 25 Washington. I'm taking Bo Nix and the Ducks.
I agree with you there. I went against Oregon on a home game earlier in the year, and I paid mightily for it, so I'm taking the home team.
Okay.
Autzen Stadium.
Next up, we are going to go to the K-State Baylor game. Number 19 K-State is at Baylor, 7:00 kick on Saturday night. Who you got in that one?
Oh, this one is tough.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
But I'm going to take Baylor at home. I'm gonna err towards the home team. I don't know if that's a wise pick because the Kansas State's playing some pretty good ball right now.
I agree with you. I'm going to take Baylor at home. Baylor's still in it in the Big 12 race, could be in the Big 12 championship game. So is K-State. Number 1 Georgia is at Mississippi State. Inconsistent offense from Mike Leach. I can't pick the home Bulldogs. I'm going with the road Dogs. Although Georgia, they scared me in their performance at Mizzou earlier this season, but I say they win this one.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I think that now you see light at the end of the tunnel. Now with the big Tennessee game behind them.
Number 4 TCU is playing at number 18 Texas on ABC on Saturday night. Who you got?
I'm going TCU. I think the road team. I think Texas has kind of been up and down. I would not be surprised if Texas won because if they put their game together, I think they can beat anybody. But I just think there's some magic, and Gary Patterson, I believe, is an assistant for Texas. So we will see. But I'm taking the road team.
I'm going with Quinn Ewers and Texas. This team seems to ride the emotional wave each week. I don't think Sark likes that. I think he'd like to get rid of that in his program. But since they'll be emotionally high for game day and Saturday night prime time, I say they win the game. All right, and then this one's going to last until about 3 a.m. Number 15, North Carolina is at Wake Forest at 7:30 on ESPN2. I love Drake May, but Sam Hartman seems to be the Tar Heels kryptonite. I'm taking the Deeks at home.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. You know what? You sold me on Drake May. I'm going North Carolina on the road.
He'll throw for 700 yards. It just may not be enough against the Deeks on Saturday night.
Where is the game, Taylor?
It's in Winston-Salem. It's not in Wake Forest. It's in Winston-Salem.
I'm sorry, Coach Bowden. Where is the game?
on Saturday night. I remember when they played at Wake Forest. Gino, thank you so much. As always, I know that you have You've got a good one that you're calling this week, right?
Nebraska, Michigan. So get to see the go blue.
Yeah, there you go. 3:30 on ABC coming up, and also on Touchdown Radio. And then I've got South Carolina and Florida at 4 on SEC Network. We'll be back on Touchdown Radio Tailgate next week on ESPNU Radio, Sirius XM, Channel 84.